The Wailing at Roanoke. A historical horror story. Pug, the Last Letter. August 18, 1590. Off the coast of Roanoke Island. The sea was quiet. Too quiet, as if it held its breath. On the deck of the Hopewell, Governor John White stood wrapped in a salt-stiffened cloak, his hands trembling as he held a damp scrap of parchment. His daughter's last letter. The ink was fading, but the words burned in his mind. Father, something stirs in the woods. It mimics voices, steals sleep, and leaves footprints of a child when none are missing. We speak of it only in whispers now. The men are afraid. Even George Howe said he heard the crying last night. But no child cries like that, not with teeth, not with words in its throat. Pray to God that you return swiftly. Your loving daughter, Eleanor Dare. He had read it 100 times during the harrowing journey back from England. The voyage had been delayed by war, storms, and the uneasy sense that fate itself tried to keep him away. Now, at last, he was here. But the land was wrong. From the ship, the shore looked undisturbed, no smoke, no figures waving, no sound. Just the thrum of cicadas and the endless trees. The colony, once bustling with over 100 settlers, men, women, and children, had fallen still. And at the edge of the trees, just past the clearing, something moved. Not wind. Not animal. Something else. A sailor shouted from the crow's nest, "Croatoan!" Carved into a tree. White's heart dropped. He had told them to leave a message if they relocated, but they were supposed to carve a Maltese cross if they left under duress. There was no cross. Only the word, Croatoan, and something else. Faint, barely etched into the wood beneath it, as if carved with shaking hands. It watches. Chapter 1. Land of Whispers. 3 years earlier. Roanoke Colony, 1587. The forest breathed a kind of damp unease. Every tree stood like a sentinel, gnarled roots twisting through the earth like the fingers of buried giants. It was a land untouched, primeval and vast. Eleanor Dare tightened her shawl around her shoulders. Her newborn Virginia, the first English child born in the New World, slept fitfully in her arms, flinching every time the wind moaned through the leaves. The settlement had grown quiet in recent days. At first, it was the little things. Food missing from storage, chickens found with their necks broken, tools moved or rusted overnight. The local Algonquian tribes kept their distance, speaking of spirits and forbidden places beyond the tree line. Even the friendliest among them, Manteo, had grown distant. And then came the wailing. It began as soft weeping at dusk, drifting in from the woods. Some claimed it was just foxes or owls. But one evening, George Howe, one of the scouts, came stumbling out of the trees, bloodied and babbling. He had followed the sound, thinking it a lost child. What he found instead, he couldn't explain. They were faces, he muttered. But wrong. Hollow. And the trees moved, Eleanor. The trees moved like they breathed. The next morning, they found George dead. He had slit his own throat in the chapel with a bone needle used for mending sails. His body was cold, but his mouth still twitched, as if murmuring something with no breath. Eleanor didn't sleep that night. Neither did many others. Governor White tried to hold the colony together. "We are a strong people," he would say. "This land will test us, but we shall endure." His words rang hollow now. The people whispered in corners. They avoided the woods. They locked their doors early and prayed fervently. The priest, Father Thomas, had begun burning strange herbs and chalking circles outside the chapel, symbols that did not appear in any Christian text Eleanor knew. She confronted him one morning. "These marks, what are they?" He looked at her with eyes too wide, rimmed red from lack of sleep. "I found them in a book the natives showed me. It is older than their people. They call it Una, the watcher beneath roots. It is not a god. It is not a devil. It is waiting." For what? For the land to be full of voices again. It hungers for sound, Eleanor. That is why it takes our children first. Eleanor clutched Virginia tighter. Her tiny chest rose and fell with uneasy breaths. That night, she dreamed of roots crawling up through the floorboards, cradling her daughter in earth-caked fingers. 2 nights later, the wailing returned. Louder this time. Closer. Men gathered with muskets and torches, forming a circle around the town. They stood in silence until just before dawn. Then, without warning, the crying stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. In the morning, a young boy named Robert Ellis was gone. No signs of struggle. No blood. His blanket was still warm. And beside his empty bed, someone had left a perfect circle of polished stones, each etched with runes that no one could read. Governor White decided he had no choice. Supplies were running low. Morale was crumbling. He would return to England and bring help, food, men, weapons. He kissed Eleanor goodbye and boarded the Hopewell. "I will return before Virginia walks," he promised her. Eleanor smiled, but it never reached her eyes. She already knew. The land would not let them leave. Chapter 2. Shadows Among the Trees. Roanoke Colony, late autumn, 1587. The trees had grown closer. Eleanor noticed it first, a slow, silent creeping. The edge of the forest had once been 100 paces from the colony's outer fence. Now, the black oaks and ancient pines loomed just beyond the gardens. Some settlers thought it imagination, others blamed the shifting fog. But Eleanor had lived there long enough to feel it. The land itself seemed to inch forward, claiming ground. The nights had turned bitter. Fires were no longer for warmth alone. They were protection. Flames kept the shadows back and the children close. But even the firelight began to feel brittle, as if something pressed against its reach. Then came the mimicry. It started with voices. First, someone heard Robert Ellis, the missing boy, singing his favorite tune near the well. When they searched, there was nothing. The next day, 2 hunters claimed they heard the governor's voice calling from deep in the woods, though he had been gone a month. And every time someone followed the voices, they vanished for hours, or returned babbling nonsense about eyes in the earth. One man didn't come back at all. William Harkin, a builder and known skeptic, stormed into the forest one evening with a torch, shouting, "I'll prove it's nothing but wind and fear." They found his boots 2 days later, sitting neatly beside a ring of bones, his own teeth laid out in the shape of a star. Father Thomas had stopped speaking entirely. He no longer held services. Instead, he spent his days staring at the forest, clutching a charred, leather-bound book no one had seen before. Eleanor dared to approach him once, while most were out foraging. "Father, what is happening here?" He didn't turn to look at her. His lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Then, "It listens." She waited, but he said nothing more. That evening, the fog rolled in thick, denser than they'd ever seen. It smelled of wet stone and decaying leaves. Eleanor stood at the edge of the palisade, clutching Virginia, now nearly 3 months old. The fog licked through the cracks in the fence. Somewhere in the distance, a voice called out. Her voice. "Bring her. I am cold." Her blood froze. She looked around. No one else seemed to hear it. But Virginia stirred in her arms, as if recognizing the sound. "Mother." The voice had changed. It was her mother's voice now, dead for years. Then another voice, unmistakable, John White's, her father. "Eleanor, you must come into the trees. It is safe here. We are all waiting." She turned from the fence and rushed inside her home, barring the door, whispering prayers into Virginia's tiny ear. That night, she didn't sleep. Neither did Virginia. The child stared wide-eyed into the rafters, silent, as if listening to something just beyond the walls. The next day, Thomasine Cooper came screaming out of the woods at dawn. Her dress was torn, her hair matted with leaves and something darker. "It took my baby," she shrieked. "It took her face and left her eyes." When the others gathered, Thomasine could barely speak. She'd woken in the night and found her daughter, Margaret, standing at the foot of the bed, motionless. She turned on the lamp, and Margaret had no face. Just smooth skin where mouth, nose, and eyes should be. But the girl whispered, "Stay quiet. It can hear you." Then she melted into black vines and vanished into the floor. They searched the house and surrounding woods, but no sign of Margaret remained. Only one thing was found, carved into the underside of Thomasine's bed frame in raw, bloody letters. "Do not speak." That day, the colony's silence began. Few dared raise their voice. Children were hushed. Laughter vanished. Even the wind seemed subdued, as if the air held its breath. Eleanor found herself waking at night to Virginia's cries, only to realize they weren't hers. The real Virginia would still be sleeping beside her, while the crying came from beneath the floorboards. One night she looked. She pulled aside the planks with shaking hands and found only cold dirt. But as she leaned closer, she heard it. Breathing. From the earth itself. 3 days later, Manteo returned. He had not been seen in weeks. He came alone, painted in ash, his eyes wild. He would not enter the settlement. He called Eleanor and Father Thomas to the edge of the clearing and would not step closer. "There is a thing beneath this island," he said, "old as stone. We speak of it only in winter, when the land is quiet. It has no name, only a hunger." Father Thomas nodded slowly. "Una." Manteo looked at him sharply. "You should not know that name. I read it in a scroll buried beneath the chapel floor. The Watcher beneath roots." Manteo's voice dropped. "It does not want blood. It does not want fire. It wants presence, voices, faces, children. It wakes when the land is made full with new life." Eleanor stepped forward. "What does it want from us?" Manteo hesitated, then said, "It wants your daughter." Chapter 3. The Pact. Roanoke Colony, early winter, 1587. Snow came early that year, dusting the roofs and pathways in a hush that made every footstep sound too loud. The forest, once alive with birds and buzzing insects, had fallen into an unnatural silence. Even the colonists walked more quietly, speaking only in whispers or not at all. Eleanor had not spoken aloud in 3 days. She feared her own voice, feared what might hear it. Since Manteo's warning, a suffocating dread hung over her. His words echoed, "It wants your daughter." Father Thomas had taken to sleeping inside the chapel now, lighting candles in strange patterns, marking the walls with charcoal sigils. He claimed he could hear the soil breathing, that its rhythm matched the cries of the missing children. 7 now. 7 children gone without trace. Robert, Margaret, little and others. No bodies. No footprints. Only whispers. Eleanor feared Virginia would be next. She kept her always close, even while gathering wood or hauling water. The child, now 4 months old, barely made a sound anymore. She didn't cry, didn't coo, just stared at things that weren't there. Sometimes Eleanor caught her daughter smiling at empty corners or at the base of trees. One night, as frost coated the windows in branching white fingers, Eleanor awoke to a sound. Not a cry, not a whisper. A voice. A man's voice, clear and calm, from just outside her door. "Eleanor, I've returned. It's safe now." Her heart surged. "Father," she whispered, crawling to the door. She pressed her ear to the wood. "It's me, John White. Open the door. Quickly." But it wasn't his voice anymore. It shifted, twisted, half buried in static and echo. She backed away in terror, clutching Virginia. And from under the door, a root snaked in, black and glistening, with a fingernail at the tip. Eleanor screamed, louder than she had in weeks. And just like that, the root recoiled as if burned, hissing like wet wood in fire. That was when she knew sound mattered. The council. By dawn, Eleanor had gathered the remaining colonists, barely 40 of them now, into the chapel. They stood huddled in the candlelight, faces pale, voices hushed. "I've heard it. You've all heard it," Eleanor said, standing beside Father Thomas. "It wants something. It's growing bolder. We have to act." An old man, Benjamin Lorne, scoffed. "Act how? Fight the dirt? Shoot the trees?" "We make a pact," Father Thomas said. All heads turned. "A bargain. An offering. That's what it wants." Silence fell over the chapel. Eleanor's stomach turned. "You're saying we give it what it wants? A child?" "No," Thomas said. "We give it sound. Voices. Source. Prayer. The piece of ourselves. Something it can feed on, something ancient. There is power in ritual. If we choose the sacrifice, we may avoid worse." Manteo, who had stayed on the edge of the settlement, entered then, quiet as the wind. He spoke. "There is a rite. It is older than my tribe. My people sealed this thing before, long ago, with blood and silence. You want it gone? Then you must give it something it will never forget." The pact ritual. 3 days later, they prepared the clearing. A ring of stones. 7 fires. All settlers gathered, wearing masks made of bark and cloth to hide their faces from what might watch. At the center stood Eleanor, holding Virginia. Father Thomas recited verses not from any Bible, but from that strange leather book, pages that writhed when touched. He called out the names of the lost: Robert, Margaret, Jonah, Thomas, Peter, Lily. For each name, a fire dimmed. Then silence. Complete. Eleanor stepped forward and placed Virginia into a cradle made of vines and iron. The child did not cry. She simply stared into the trees. And then they answered. A great rumble shook the soil. The trees bent backward as if repelled by some invisible force. From the earth rose something, not seen but felt. A pressure. A presence. The fires turned blue. The whispers began, hundreds, maybe thousands, like voices trapped underwater. Every tree seemed to lean in. Roots writhed. Stone cracked. The masks of the colonists flaked and burned. And then a voice, not in air, but in bone, spoke. This one is known. It has spoken. It has offered. It shall be spared. Everyone fell to the ground. Eleanor stood alone, unmoving, as Virginia reached up toward the invisible thing and smiled. The air collapsed with a thunderous clap. When the colonists looked up, the fires were out. The forest was still. The cradle was empty. But Virginia still lay in Eleanor's arms, unharmed. The only sign of the ritual, the ground in the center had become glass, as if scorched by the sun itself. And in the center of the blackened earth, etched as if by a giant's claw. Return with silence. That night, the settlers did not speak. That night, the trees did not move. That night, the watchers slept. But for how long? Chapter 4. The Vanishing. Roanoke Colony, Deep Winter, 1587. The snow came heavier after the ritual, thick, choking flurries that erased paths and blanketed the roofs in silence. It suited the colonists. After the pact, none dared speak above a whisper. Many didn't speak at all. It had been 15 days since the offering. Virginia still breathed, still lived, but was no longer quite right. She had not blinked in a week. The quiet life. The colony fell into a strange rhythm. Tools were used only at midday. Meals were eaten in silence. Children were no longer allowed to laugh. Singing, once a comfort, was forbidden. Father Thomas called it the price. He said that if they stayed quiet, if they obeyed the pact, the watcher would sleep again. But something had changed. The forest was no longer just near. It was inside. Moss began to grow on the walls. Fungi bloomed in corners of the chapel. The well water tasted of roots. And one by one, colonists began to lose their voices, not by force, but by choice. As if the memory of speaking had faded. One woman, Catherine Ray, stitched her own lips shut with thread. She left behind a journal with only one entry. Heard my own voice in the woods. Wasn't me. A stranger at the fence. Eleanor stood watch one gray morning when she saw something strange near the edge of the forest. A figure. A man dressed like an English officer, but ragged and bone-thin. His face was a blur, even in daylight, like oil smeared on glass. He stood still, facing the settlement. She called out, not aloud but with her mind. "For you." He lifted one arm and pointed to the ground at his feet. Then slowly, silently, he turned and walked into the woods. Later, Manteo and Father Thomas found the spot. They dug. Just inches beneath the snow, they uncovered a stone circle. At its center, a decayed wooden post. Bound to it with rope was the skull of a deer, carved with hundreds of tiny letters. Eleanor brushed it clean. The writing was English. It will not stop. It only waits. It never forgets. The second taking. That night, a girl went missing, Sarah Morley, age 8. Her father swore she had slept in his arms. But in the morning, she was gone. In her place, on the floor, was a pile of teeth. Eleanor was the first to arrive. The girl's father knelt in the snow, weeping silently. He held something in his hand. A bone flute. Father Thomas snatched it from him and threw it into the fire. But they all heard it before it burned. A single shrill note that echoed far too long for something so small. Virginia twitched in her sleep that night. The writings appear. Soon after, carvings began to appear, on trees, doors, the sides of wagons. One word, Croatoan. No one knew what it meant, not even Manteo. "It is not our word," he said. "It is its word." Eleanor feared it was a countdown. A promise. Or a name. But for what? One by one, colonists began to accept it. They painted the word on their homes, wore it around their necks, carved it into the snow. As if by branding themselves, they might be spared. The final letter. On January 3rd, Eleanor wrote her final letter to her father. "Father, the land does not want us. The air is no longer ours. The trees listen. Virginia listens. I do not know if you will return, or if you will find us here when you do. But if you do, do not speak. Do not call out. Do not ask where we've gone. We are not gone. We are beneath. Croatoan." She left the letter with a cross etched into the chapel floor. The last word she ever wrote was not in ink, but in blood, her own. The vanishing. On the night of the next full moon, the entire colony gathered one last time. No one spoke. No one ran. They stood in rows, holding one another, facing the forest. And when the trees opened, like curtains pulling back, they walked into the blackness, willingly. Only Eleanor stayed. She clutched Virginia, now pale and still as the last fire died. She stood at the edge of the clearing and whispered, "If you take her, take me too." Then she walked forward, and the earth swallowed them. By the time John White returned, months later, nothing remained. No bodies, no blood, just the word Syrian, carved deep into a tree, and beneath it, scratched in trembling letters, "It watches." Chapter 5, The Search Party. Roanoke Island, August 1590. John White stood on the soft earth where the colony once stood, staring at nothing. The settlement was gone. Not burned. Not abandoned. Not looted. Just gone. No tools. No debris. No graves. No people. Only the faint outlines of what had once been cabins, now overtaken by vines and saplings, as if the forest had grown overnight. And then the carving. Croatoan, etched deep into the bark of a tree near the center of the clearing. Below it, in smaller letters, as if scratched by a child, "It watches." There was no Maltese cross. No sign of distress. No sign at all. The investigation. Captain Stafford, who had come with White on the Hopewell, ordered a search party to fan out. They spent hours combing the forest. Nothing. No prints, no voices, not even animal sounds. Only the trees. And the silence. One sailor, Harrington, refused to go past the old well. "The earth hums here," he said, "like something breathing, like a beast asleep." When they returned that evening, Stafford asked White what might have happened. White could only shake his head. They left, but not to Croatoan. They were taken. Taken by whom? White didn't answer. He knelt beside the chapel, what remained of it, and noticed something. A single page, stuck to the stones with sap. A letter. His daughter's hand. The ink was faded but legible. "Father, if you find this, do not look for us. We are not lost. We are beneath. We are echoes. We are in the soil now where the watcher sleeps. It feeds on the sound of those who forget their place. The land belongs to it. Not us. Never us. You will hear our voices. They are not ours. Tell no one. Speak no more." White folded the letter, trembling. He never showed it to Stafford. never spoke of it again. The truth beneath. That night, a storm rolled in, fierce and sudden. Lightning struck the trees. The sailors took shelter on the ship, leaving White alone at the shore. And there, by moonlight, he saw them. Faces in the woods. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. Eyes like candlelight. Skin like moss. Silent. Watching. And in the center, a woman with a child in her arms. Eleanor. Her eyes were gone, replaced by soft roots. The baby, Virginia, had no mouth, but a sound emerged from her chest. A lullaby, sung not in breath, but in vibration echoing through the trees. White fell to his knees. The woman turned slowly, and without a word, they vanished into the dark. Epilogue, Croatoan. White never returned to Roanoke again. The Crown dismissed his report. The colony was declared lost to nature. But those who came after told stories of crying in the trees, of children's laughter in the wind, of carvings appearing overnight in places where no man had walked. The word Croatoan became a curse, a mystery, a warning. And the forest? It grew thicker every year. And somewhere beneath the roots, in the cold, damp earth, the watcher listens. Till the end.